We ask that you wait until the agenda item you're here for comes up for discussion. Comments relating to the agenda items are welcome after the board has an opportunity to discuss the topic. We ask that you wait until the agenda item you're here for comes up for discussion. The Board of County Commissioners will invite comments on topics not included on the agenda during general public comment after considering the consent agenda. This is a time for addressing issues not on today's agenda, but related to the general business of Douglas County. We will first call on folks who are here in person, then we'll turn to any online commenters who are here with us tonight. If you're on Zoom, please plan to use the raise your hand function when the time comes and listen for staff to call your name. All comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and we ask everyone to give their full name and Douglas County residence for our meeting minutes. All public comments should be directed to the Douglas County Commission. Campaigning for public office is not allowed. We also reserve the right to mute and remove any speaker who is vulgar, rude, or inappropriate. Public should also know that comments received by the commission during our meetings do not represent the views of Douglas County government. If visual aids are used during the meeting, the presenter will share their screen. Please know that online participants will not be able to view them without a computer, smartphone, or tablet during tonight's meeting. Materials are published online for your reference. Lastly, a recording of this meeting will be available on our YouTube page and website. So we'll start tonight with our consent agenda. Then we'll go to general public comment. Our regular agenda has 4 items on it. We'll do the CUP for the Well Wilderness Kids. Then we have another CUP for a vacation rental use. We'll talk about racial equity initiatives and end our session with an update from Little Government Relations. If perhaps you came here tonight thinking that we were looking at a TBU for wind and solar, that's not happening tonight. That will be at the end of June. So just make sure nobody's going to be waiting for that. And then we'll finish with appointments and Commissioner Administrator miscellaneous. So we'll kick off it with our consent agenda. Commissioners, do either of you have anything you'd like to remove from the agenda for further discussion? Nope. No, seeing none, I'll check in the public, see if anyone here in the public has an item they'd like to remove for further discussion. Anyone online? All right, thank you, Commissioners. I take a motion for the consent agenda.
Commissioner Reed, I move to approve consent agenda items 1.1 through 1.7.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, we'll move on to general public comment. If you're here to provide general public comment, we welcome that. And if you come up to the microphone, don't forget to give your full name and address for our minutes. Who's up first?
Now it is. Okay. Hi, my name is Sue Herrick. I live here in Lawrence. And I'm here tonight with a report, kind of like I told you I'd do last week, about the gunplay in downtown Lawrence on Massachusetts. Since I saw you last week and showed you the headline about the first incident where a teen got probation for shooting at pedestrians downtown and was let go on probation because he didn't intend to hurt anyone. Since then, on May 5th, Friday, the headline on the Journal World is a man accused of threatening students with an assault rifle. Same result. This guy, this perp, spent less than 4 hours in custody and he walked out. You know, I emailed each of you. Patrick, thanks for your response. The frustration I feel is that I'm looking for voices to join me because this outfit is not doing their job. They're working for the bad guys. And we're going to suffer for it. Last night at City Commission, they talked about travel and tourism here and quite a sum that comes from that. Well, when people figure out that if you come to Lawrence, you might get shot on, 11th and Mass, and they'll let the guy go because he might not have meant to hurt you. I think we're in deep doo-doo. The second one was right next to Free State High School on Overland Drive. There was an assault rifle involved. It had some numbers and letters and doesn't mean anything to me. But as I said, that guy spent four hours before he was let go. I think he has the 10th, he has a hearing that he's maybe going to show up for. But back to my point, we need to save the city and we need voices to do it. I tried to see the attorney general, or I mean, the district attorney yesterday, walked into the office and all I came away with was a little business card. So I went their route and I have gotten nowhere. I find that people like that are hiding behind their computers. They're hiding behind closed office doors. A man named Joshua, who's an assistant DA today, will not allow me an in-person meeting. So, I walked away thinking, how am I going to, get somebody's attention when I think they're not doing their job? I guess what as I told him in my last email today, I'm going up the ladder. I'm going to the state attorney general's office. People that hide behind their office and hide behind computers are cowards. Thank you.
Next.
My name is Joe Herink, and I'd like to begin by something a very wise man said. The measure of intelligence is the ability to change. That man was Albert Einstein. I'm here tonight to ask us all to come together because we've all been duped with this pandemic. This has caused great harm to our citizens. At last count, we've lost 1 million lives to the vaccinations, not to the disease, the bioweapon that all of us taxpayers funded. Our government has lied to us continually. And besides 1 million that are already dead and still dying, there's 4 million that are adverse events that can't work. And the biggest cohort in this group is the working class, the millennials, 25 to 44 years old. And we need to open our eyes and see what's going on. We're all Americans. If you were, the 14th Amendment tells us that if you were born in the United States or you were naturalized as a citizen, you have all the rights. There's no discrimination against any group. And for years, all we've talked about is dividing people. This is one time when we need to come together and get rid of this enemy. We've all been under the influence of Nazis. They've infiltrated our government, our education system, our court system, every entity you can think of, medical. And there's a lot of people out there that need a lot of help. And it's going to take all of us to get the job done. Now, when I was inducted into the military, I held up my right hand and I took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And essentially, you've done the same thing with your elected offices. I'm asking you to use your voices to help these people that are in need. This is ongoing. We have to get this stopped. Thank you very much.
Any other public comment? Okay, we'll close checking online. Any public comment online? Okay, we'll close public comment. And we'll move on to our regular agenda and we'll start with a CUP 230081 for Well Wilderness Kids, south of 1128 2100 Road. Hi, Catherine.
Good evening, Commissioners. Catherine Week with the Planning Office. I'm here to present the first CUP item before you this evening for conditional use permit 230081 for outdoor recreation facility use. And it's on the road of East 2100 Road. I'm going to try to go ahead and share my screen here. Just give me the okay when it gets up that we are in fact seeing my presentation.
We see it.
Okay, get it going here. You see it now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as I mentioned, this is for an outdoor recreation facility use. It does have the adjunct use of therapy, but it does fall into the outdoor recreation facility category as a best fit use. Surrounding zoning in the area is primarily the AG2 district, which this does reside in, and the AG1 district. So I'm going to go briefly over the key points, and we can go into more detail once we get into discussion. But the key points of this particular request is to utilize the property for some outdoor therapy activities as part of a business that does not reside on the property. And the use entails small groups of children that would be coming to the site for therapy and outdoor activity. There's also an existing structure on the building that they would utilize for some shelter and some support for those outdoor activities that they would be doing. The closest classification for this use in the current zoning regulations is outdoor recreation facility. Now, typically that category is for larger types of outdoor recreation facilities, particularly like sporting events or group sport activities. But this is the best use category for this particular use as determined by the Zoning and Codes Director. And so this zoning district is AG2, as I mentioned, and it does permit that outdoor recreation facility use via conditional use permit. So they do need a conditional use permit to utilize it for this use. If it's approved, all applicable building permits would still need to be obtained. They need to make sure that the structure and the use for those activities on the property has all relevant permits from Douglas County Zoning and Codes, and also driveway permit from the township, which is Eudora Township. A variance request for an existing front setback was recently approved by the Douglas County Zoning Board on 4/17/23, and that was just documenting where that current structure resides on the property. And it did get a reduction from, I believe it's 110 feet down to 92 feet. So in going over the review criteria for conditional use permits, the items of criteria that we review are the zoning and uses of nearby property, the character of the area, suitability of the property for the restricted uses, impacts on the potential or the natural environment, potential impacts from the use, potential impacts on the use of any community facilities or utilities or existing infrastructure that may be there. And then any conformance needs to be in conformance with the comprehensive plan, whether or not a time limit is appropriate, and whether or not it complies with any specific zoning regulations particular to that use. And I can go over more of these in particulars if we get into some of these items of discussion. Staff did feel that with some suggested conditions, this particular use and the scale of the use could be appropriate for nearby zoning and the character of the area, and that it didn't have any potential negative impacts on the natural environment or community facilities as they existed. Staff also felt that there is a time limit that would be appropriate for this particular use, and that would be the standard 5-year review period by Douglas County Zoning Codes and a 10-year limitation. And that's just to maintain, as this use may have a potential to evolve, we want to make sure that the use stays within the scope of the ask in the CUP application. So this map shows you kind of the general nature of the area. This is along, as I said, the east side of East 2100 Road. It's outlined by this blue area. There are rural residences all along East 2100 Road and several along North 1100 Road and to the North 1200 Road. Primarily the residence exists though on East 2100 Road. This is a general sketch as described by the applicant showing the layout of the property. To the west of the property, you can see there is an existing graveled area with 2 access points. They would not be changing this. They would be proposing to utilize this as it exists on the site. They still need to get the township permits for the existing curb cuts that are there. The township has been in correspondence with us and does state that the location of the curb cuts is not really a concern for them, but they do need to get that permit still. The nature activity area is generally to the east of where that existing structure is located. And there is a porta potty and wash station just to the north of that existing structure. And the applicant may describe these areas in more detail as we get into this. Also, the flow of the traffic is anticipated primarily, I believe, to come from the north, but there is a potential to come from the south as well. It would enter the south access point and then exit through the north access point. Again, this is just zoomed in to the existing configuration on the site, showing you that distance from the variance that they received from the center of East 2100 Road to the westerly-most corner of that structure was 92 feet, and they did get that variance for that existing structure. And this kind of shows you the lay of the land as to what is on the site currently. Let me back up 1 second to this overall image. Just want to note, and there is an image in the staff report, that the majority of this central area in or on the property is regulatory floodplain. There is a creek that kind of runs through just west of central, I guess, west of the central area. But most of the activity would not be crossing through that floodplain unless, of course, it was transversible at that time. They're not anticipating having a lot of activity on the east portion of the site. It would all be close to this particular structure, and then some walkways along this westerly side of the creek. And again, the applicant can describe that in detail if you need that. So I added this slide for the Planning Commission and for you as well, because we have had some comments and we may have some discussion about one of the conditions that was recommended. This slide shows you the general routes to the property, which is identified with a star. Primarily, they would be coming from the north and or from the east, assumingly on North 1200 Road and then proceeding south to the property. There is the potential that they could also come from North 1100 Road to the property. The red lines are indicating where gravel road currently exists. And so if we get into a discussion about the conditions and some dust palliative care, this slide may be helpful in showing where exactly those dust routes are located. And I do have some additional information from the trustee for the Eudora Township and from Douglas County Public Works Director about dust palliative care, some of those costs involved, and the distances. We can get into detail on that once we get into the discussion. Staff did recommend approval of the CUP for the outdoor recreation facility, and the Planning Commission also recommended approval with conditions as recommended. There was a lot of discussion, but ultimately the Planning Commission has forwarded it to you with the conditions as recommended. Again, I anticipate we will have some discussion about the latest or the last condition on the list, but we can discuss that further when we get there. And these are just the outline of the recommended conditions, and we can go over those in detail as we discuss. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and I will be happy to stand for any questions or clarifications if you have them.
Thank you, Catherine. Commissioners, do you want to ask questions now or hear from the applicant first? Is the applicant here? You have a chance to address the commission if you'd like. You don't have to, but you can. Come
Up
on,
here?
right up here.
Commissioners and Catherine, I feel obligated as she comes to the podium to just say, as a non-civil engineer, to control dust on a road, it's called palliative. Palliative care is what you give somebody when they're dying.
Yeah.
So I want to clarify, the road is not dying. But the proper term is palliative
Yeah.
care. It's
My
just not care.
apologies. Yes,
It
my
just-
apologies.
Just palliative.
Just pass.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Novacek. I'm the director of Nature Play with Well Wilderness Kids. And I think that since the meeting on the 24th of April, which some of you may have witnessed, like for me, was very emotional. So since then, I just wanted to share with you what I've tried to do because I want to try to come to like middle ground with some of the neighbors that have concern about the dust and the potential growth of our program. I typed up a letter and I delivered letters to as many neighbors as possible. Many of them that were not home during the time of day that I went. And I was able to get some phone numbers from neighbors that attended the last meeting and invited them to come onto the property, whether they were meeting me for the first time or just to continue to talk about some of the concerns on last Sunday. And there were 3 sets of neighbors that came out of, I think I probably delivered at least 12 letters. So, but it was a good discussion, I felt like. There are mixed opinions of neighbors. The neighbors directly to the north of us have been the neighbors that I have gotten to know like the most, and have talked to them a lot about just different issues, going on. And I'm always checking in with them because they are in the closest proximity to us. There are neighbors right to the south of us. To be honest, I have not met them. I feel like when we are there, they're not home. And then I've recently met Travis McCormick and have had discussion with him about a lot of things. And he's very much in the know about things going on in the Eudora community as far as 2100 Road. I actually have also reached out to Catherine many times because I feel like I just need help trying to decide what the best route. If we receive this conditional permit, I just want to make sure there's support around our program because we're serving children, and we're serving children in a very therapeutic way. Families are entrusting us to have their kids come to our programs. And, the purpose of our program is to bring children into nature to allow them to work on their development, but we're all very specialized professionals. Like I myself am a physical therapist. We have occupational therapists. Our assistant director, Lori, is here. She's a social worker. We have teachers, and we all collaboratively work together to support these children. So it's very important for us that these children's safety is number one. And so I think also just having support from the community has really been important from the very beginning. And we purchased this property in November of 2020, I believe. And definitely the last couple of years have been very much kind of like a pilot program. And so I was adding up how many cars currently come and go from the property. So on Thursdays, we have 6 cars come, whether that's our team members or families, because many of the families have multiple children that come. So they're coming in one vehicle. And then 6 cars leaving on that Thursday. And then right now we have a seasonal Friday morning program, which doesn't go all year round, but it is happening for 8 weeks during the spring. And 6 cars come and drop, either our employees or families dropping their children off and leave. So a total of 12 cars a week is the size of our program at the moment. I wanted to just emphasize that we have no intention of becoming like a YMCA camp. And first of all, we're not even able to access the back part of our property that's on the east side of the creek. Because when we were going through this whole planning process, we need to have some sort of bridge for emergency purposes. That if someone were injured, an adult or a child, that there was a way to get them back across the creek, back to the road, to the vehicle, to care. So currently right now, we're only using the small area on the west side of the property. And then the building was placed in hopes of being able to use it for storage currently, extreme weather. And then the hope is that we could maybe offer some private therapies inside of that building moving forward. So right now, our program is very, in my opinion, very small. Okay, so that is kind of just giving you some information about our program. What I feel like I'm feeling conflicted about is because I'm hearing information like this concern about dust on 2100 Road existed before Well Wilderness even came. And so now I feel like we're here and we're a part of it, but like how much would be deemed fair for a program of our size to help with the palliative care of the road? And so that was the discussion on Sunday between neighbors and myself, and trying to figure out like what would be fair. And two of the neighbors that were there definitely didn't feel like it would be fair to expect our small business to pay for palliative care from right now that the condition says from the front of the property to the next nearest paved road. And again, you saw how many ways families can come to the property. And so if we were to be responsible for both directions, north and south to the nearest paved road, I mean, that's a lot of distance, and seems like it would be rather expensive and would honestly probably close us down at the moment. And I'm just being honest because our program isn't even making it, like if it were like $8,000 to $10,000 to pay for that, our program's not even making that on an annual basis. So I'm just questioning because there was lots of discussion about how there's a lot of school traffic that's going down 2100 Road now. When we're there, I mean, my assistant director, Lori, and I were talking about on the way here, there are tons of, like, I shouldn't say tons. We should count how many, like in a 2.5 hour time span, which is the amount of our program, there's at least 10 to 15 cars that drive by, and that's during the daytime hours. Some of them are driving really fast. And thankfully our kids and our program are like away from the road. So I think what I'm like here tonight is like to say, hey, how can we like come to common ground so that if this permit does go through, how can we do our due diligence and being a part of the community to pay for the palliative care and to do our part? But I'm feeling a little unsettled about being responsible for that total distance from our property to the next paved road. And then one last thing, one kind of proposed idea was maybe instead of being reevaluated every 5 years, maybe this is an annual review to where we are logging how many cars are coming in and out of our property on a weekly basis. And that is the information that would be utilized to determine how much we would help pay for palliative care of the road.
Thank you. We may have some questions for you, so. Okay, commissioners, how about we do some questions now? I have some questions for Catherine. So Catherine, well, actually, no, I'm going to redo that. I'm going to ask the
Okay.
applicant some questions. So my first question is, there is not a residence on this property at all. Is that correct?
Correct.
And your business is located outside of Douglas County. Is that correct?
Our original location is in Olathe, Kansas.
Okay, so is this property and the therapy that goes on this property an extension of that business in Olathe? So this is a business that's running on agriculture land. Is that correct?
In Eudora.
In Douglas County, it's an Olathe business that's running on agriculture land in Douglas County. Is that correct?
As far as I understand, that's.
Okay.
Mhm.
So Catherine, then my question, go ahead, Sarah. Looks like you're going to chime in here.
Well, unless it's being used for an agricultural use, it will not be taxed at an agricultural rate.
You said that, not me,
Yeah.
right? Yes, okay.
But
Now, my question for Catherine is, Catherine, how come we didn't consider a general business zoning for this instead of a conditional use permit. My understanding of conditional use permits, especially, in cases where
Mhm.
we've done agribusiness permits, have been because there is currently a residence or something else on that property, and that we think the added use of that property could be
Mhm.
used for something else. Can you just talk me through your thinking on that?
Well, yes. So there was a meeting with Douglas County Zoning and Codes and the Planning Department. I was not part of that first meeting, but the information carried forward through that meeting was that it could be accomplished through a conditional use permit because the use is permitted, even though it is not, it's not a home-based business. And so basically the use is existing on its own as a outdoor recreation facility. So it is existing on its own. I'm guessing the direction in that meeting, and I wasn't in that meeting, was that a conditional use permit process is a little more straightforward than a rezoning to a general business zoning district in this particular location with the AG 1 and AG 2 zoning. And so they're both options that potentially could have permitted the use. I think in this case, this conditional use permit was a more viable path forward for this particular use.
Other questions, commissioners?
I have a question for Catherine.
Mhm.
So because there's no residents here and no existing structures, it's not addressed. But it would seem that that would be of value for the use that we're talking about. What is that easy to accomplish, or is there a particular trigger in order to get this piece of property addressed?
Yeah, so I didn't know that either at the beginning of this process. And so if a conditional use permit is approved, it would be assigned an address at that point. So currently, it doesn't have an address because it doesn't have a use technically as far as the codes are concerned. So it would be assigned an address at that point.
Okay, thanks. Just thinking for emergency access, easier
Mhm.
to find something with an address.
Mhm.
So I speak to Commissioner Kelly's point of those two paths forward, neither being, the super fit for this, just kind of falls outside of some of the boxes. But I would think a rezoning for that property to business would be pretty awkward considering how little of it can be used and how that zoning would then carry with the land into other uses that would be of a much different compatibility or discompatibility with the neighborhood than what's being proposed. So I'm comfortable moving forward with how it's been proposed, unless Commissioner Kelly, you've got particular concerns beyond that.
Yeah, I think I want to hear some public comment first. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Okay, we'll take public comment on this item. Is anyone here to provide public comment? You'll have 3 minutes to provide public comment.
Three minutes. My name is Travis McCormick. I live at 1110 East 2100 Road. I'm about 500 feet or a little more south of this location. Let's be clear. I'm not against services that help children. This is not a question of whether this business should operate, but where this business is operated. The impact on the surrounding area and the impact to the Eudora Township. There's currently 8 staff recommendations. Number 8 is for dust palliative to be applied to the closest paved road. There are 3 paved roads equal distance from Well Wilderness to location. So I guess I'm interested in how this will be determined and which part of the neighborhood gets the benefit of the dust palliative. It will or has been said that the request to spray dust palliative in one direction, let alone 3, is too big a burden. This same requirement is often applied to other for-profit and non-for-profit businesses in the county, such as event spaces or Midnight Farms. 4,000 feet of dust palliative is actually provided by the county to Midnight Farms. For taxpayers pay for that. In talking with Stephanie, it is her belief that the business is something the area needs. This would indicate the traffic could come from all directions, not just down a single suggested route. I like to look at the numbers. As a resident, I pay the township $670 a year in taxes. Currently, we have 3 vehicles that enter at least once a day. Well Wilderness is currently paying the township $175 in taxes for road maintenance. On page 5 of the staff report, it shows the possibility to generate up to 6 times as much traffic in a single day because these are drop-off and pickup services. Where's the reimbursement to the township for the road wear and tear? Why would that burden be passed to the township taxpayers? Where is the tax revenue? The business would need a hard limit of occupancy similar to an event space. Under the current guidelines, a recreational area has no limit. This is a for-profit business. If the business booms, there is nothing stopping the Novaceks from running multiple sessions a day, possibly doubling or tripling the traffic. Again, this is drop off and pickup. These cars come by, have the potential to come by multiple times a day. Looking at the possibility of the impact based on the staff report should be the highest priority. Currently, there may only be a few cars a day. However, the impact to the area and the township should be evaluated and the possibility of the impact based on what is provided in the staff report. So on page 5 of that staff report, it indicates they could have up to 6 to 8 kids in a session with 2 sessions, 2 instructors for each session, but it doesn't limit the number of sessions in a day. To your point, it's not zoned as a business, it's zoned as an aggregate. Thank you.
Thanks, Travis. Any other public comment on this item?
I'm Jim Gabriel, the trustee of Eudora Township. And we were thinking that after reading the website that there would be one route to come in, and we were wanting Dust Palliative put down on one route for that because of the neighbors and all that being, since this is a business, they don't have a residence or they really don't pay any taxes for their business or anything in Douglas County. They're not part of the community trying to get in there, but we don't want our residents to have to suffer with all the dust coming in.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Anyone online, Sarah? Okay. We give the applicant a chance to respond to any public comment if you like. You don't have to, but we do give the opportunity. Okay. We'll bring it up to the commission for discussion, possible motions and votes.
Is it fair to ask you, Jim, to come up and can I ask you a question about Eudora Township? I appreciate it. Thank you. You didn't know what you were getting into and you came and offered to speak. So along any of these proposed routes, which I think you're right, we would look at one designated route as opposed to all possibilities and put that in the CUP. I think that's pretty standard, but are there any neighbors that you know of in that among those routes that are paying for dust palliative at the moment? Because I know usually people will ask for, the 200 feet in front of my house and they'll pay for that themselves. Are any of those doing that now?
Yeah, there's quite a few along that route. And right now, of course, the county is kind of messed up with the dust palliative because our supplier it was supposed to be applied in March on that road and it hadn't been applied yet. But one reason there's more traffic is there's a couple of bridges out. And so the traffic, we thought that was going to be the detour route. So the township has paid for, and the county also has paid for certain miles through there to do the whole mile for the excess traffic.
What route was expected to be detour? Was it 1100?
Their bridge is out on 1000 Road. And we were looking at coming down 2100 Road to 1100 Road. And they were planning on people going back east to 1061 to get around the bridge. And we did from 1100 Road all the way to Winchester Road in the city because we figured if people are going to the school or any of that, and we also did 1200 Road, there's a half mile and they're going to cut through. They're not going to just jog through a mile and go.
So, and that dust palliative did get applied?
Not
that
yet.
route? That was
We're
just planned
got our
on?
fingers crossed or on the schedule for next Tuesday.
Okay. I guess, so one of my reasons for asking is, are these homes that have already identified that this is a problem and we are taking care of it, taking responsibility for it? Or is it a question of here's a business and here's our chance to get something taken care of that we didn't bother to take care of ourselves? So just trying to figure out What's the level of the problem? What's the level of community stepping up for the problem for their own homes, and just how much we're looking at? I'll ask you one more question while I've got you. Do you know off the top of your head price for linear foot of dust palliative?
I think what we paid last year was $1.40, or I should say for this year.
Okay.
And again, some of that's what the residents paid. We actually paid a little extra to get it put on earlier. So I doubt if the company out of Topeka is going to give us a refund on that, but hopefully we just get the dust palliative.
If a homeowner is paying for that in front of their home, is it, what's typical, 50 feet, 200 feet?
Some of them are anywhere from 300 and some of them go up to 1,000 feet. And they will get, like when there's a group of houses, they will get a couple houses together and do it. Because if you get just a house here and then you skip without it and you get a house here, it's really hard for us to maintain.
Right.
You're up and down with a blade and then you start having ridges and it's kind of a nightmare.
So if a business comes in and is expected to do the dust palliative, do they do the spaces that are between houses that are not in front of somebody's house? Do they do over again the part that people are already paying for, or how does that work out? And that may be a question for Catherine. I don't need to keep bugging you.
In our township, the only other one we've had do that is Hams, and they had to do the whole roads just because it was just constant dust.
They're a different size company, perhaps.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much.
Commissioner Willie, I did have that question for Catherine to try and get a sense of other instances in which businesses are paying for dust palliative. I think the wording in the report is about to the nearest paved
Mhm.
road, right? So can you
Yes.
just give us a sense
Yeah.
of what kind of that, especially with that 300 to 1,000 foot range that we just kind
Yeah.
of heard is typical for residents?
Yeah, so I did do some additional digging and got some more information for you, because this is standard language that goes in on CUPs that we are asking for that dust mitigation. And so I called Chad Voigt, the County Public Works Director, and he basically it normally says to the nearest paved road, because typically halfway into the section is half a mile. And so normally you're not traveling multiple miles to the nearest paved road. And so that was where the to the nearest paved road kind of came from. In this case, to the nearest paved road is approximately a mile plus in each direction. So we're looking at potentially 14,000 linear feet, 14,400 linear feet of potential dust mitigation to the nearest paved road. And that would be in both directions. If you were doing in one direction, that would be half of that. And Chad did let me know that this would be over and above pretty much any other CUP that we've had. The distance would be over and above. And typically we do designate one route, and then we put that route in the language for the condition, and they're responsible for letting their the people who are coming to their business know what that route is. And so they would be responsible for that route is typically how it would be done. Now, if it's still an excessive distance or deemed to be excessive, then in the past, they have also done, as Jim had explained, where they would do it in front of existing residences. And there are approximately 15 residences along East 2100 Road, and then along North 1200 Road, which would be the route that's designated on this particular business's website. That's the website where Jim, kind of determined how are they getting there. So, I mean, you could tailor it in any way to kind of fit what you feel is best suited in this particular instance for this particular use. Again, total distance is probably 14,400 plus feet. I did check with Chad too about the price, current price. Jim probably got a older price, but current price for the dust mitigation is $1.50 per linear feet. So that's what it's going for now. So it is a substantial amount of money. But again, you know, they're using this property just like neighbors are using their own properties. And so dust mitigation is kind of expected if they're going to be utilizing the property. So hopefully that answered your question as to where the language came from and how maybe it needs to be tailored a little more specifically in this particular case.
Catherine, I believe you also handled the most recent event space application that we had on
Yes.
East 800 Road north of Highway 40. And we did waive that were not required to put down dust palliative for the size of event space that they were and the quarter-mile distance to the nearest paved road. Is that correct?
That is correct. And again, I think that was distance based as well. You know, that was a much shorter distance to the nearest paved road. So that may have weighed into your discussion. So
Catherine, do you know what's the average number of car trips that a single family home generates? Because we usually don't just leave in the morning and come back in the evening. There's quite a bit more that happens in a, you know, especially if you have multiple people in a home.
that is a good question. I don't have that particular stat handy, but I do know there was some discussion at the Planning Commission meeting from some of the residents who came to the meeting. And they did talk about how many cars they actually have coming to and from their property as rural residents. And, you know, some of them did say it was five plus, and there's probably multiple trips. So.
So commissioners, I think this will be probably the gist of the discussion is how much traffic is too much traffic and how much traffic requires dust palliative and how much doesn't. But I also kind of want to just foundationally say we put a lot of money and time and energy into mental health in this county. And this is where the upstream work happens so that people don't need those dollars and those services later on. Like this is a fabulous use. This is a fabulous thing to have happening. I mean, getting kids into the outdoors is part of why we are sponsoring a Douglas County open space program. I mean, we have values that align with this. So I just want to kind of start with that there will be some things that might need to be worked out, but I am hoping that we find a way forward for this use to occur. So I'm showing my hand a little bit there. We'll see what other commissioners are thinking.
Can I add one more thing, Commissioner Willie, to your question about the dust mitigation? It might be useful to specify how frequently, if you decide dust mitigation is warranted. Typically, it's yearly. So that might be something to also ponder as you're discussing this.
Yeah, I appreciate the application. I appreciate what you said, Commissioner Willie, because I agree with you. And my day job is helping kids, so I am, you know, super sensitive to that. But I also, we seem to keep going down a slippery slope with our CUPs in the unincorporated area and the number of businesses that we are essentially using in the unincorporated area. And I don't know that that makes a decision for me on this, but I am, you know, the number of landscaping companies that are just parking trucks in the unincorporated. I mean, we just continually use the unincorporated area for business. And I'm not sure that's its best use. I think it's avoiding bringing business into the community. I understand that this use can't be done inside the city limits, but I'm just troubled that that's why I asked about general business. It almost seems like we need another code area or something here, because, you know, ag land has certain limitations for us and the impacts on the community are significant. And yet there is a stress on our infrastructure when these businesses use those rural roads, and yet how we recoup the cost of that, how we deal with the cost. And, you know, I don't have a solution to this, but it's continually troubling to me.
We also have a still a large number of new homes that are being built that are also stressing those roads. And that's a conversation we just haven't had in totality is, like we did see some, traffic study data in here, like how many of our gravel roads are getting past that threshold of what they can really handle. And we're not having that conversation when we talk about new homes either. The landscape companies, that is a sore spot for me because that's a disconnect between what is needed in the city and what is allowed in the city, and the rural areas take the brunt of that. And that does make for a lot of trucks and traffic and heavy trucks that have really no business that they're performing in the unincorporated area, except that they've been pushed out of town. So I think that's probably a different discussion. I'm very glad to have that discussion. I'm also, we had kind of mentioned probably half a year ago about wanting to redo rural home business regulations. And I think that's a good time for some of these conversations too. And that we haven't gotten to that. I'd sure like to. I don't mind, seeing if we can kind of flag that and see where that conversation might be and when it might come back to us. But we talk about the agricultural use of this 6-acre parcel is that it is entirely wooded. Agricultural uses generally, as we think of them, would be limited to the very west portion, which is overgrowing in cedar trees, and that won't be available for agricultural use in the near future either. There's also no access to it, or not much access except from other properties. So there's not a lot of agricultural use that's really in jeopardy with this property, like there are with other uses. So I think wilderness is probably the best use for that corridor along the Little Wakarusa Creek. It's a great creek. It's a beautiful corridor. I haven't been in that part of it, but I've certainly been in other parts of Little Wakarusa.
Yeah, I appreciate both your comments, and to sort of rewind, Commissioner Willie, I have same feelings about sort of this particular parcel of land, though it is zoned as agriculture, is not currently utilized that way and is not really in a condition to be utilized that way. So this current use by this organization and these programs, I think is a great use. And I am also struggling with some of those same tensions. And, my immediate reaction when I first started to read this staff report was to think back to home business discussions and go back and read some of that before it occurred to me, wait a minute, there is no residence on this property. So then for me personally, that was it threw me for a little bit of a curveball about how to think of it. To Commissioner Kelly's earlier question, thinking about the taxation and use of that land, but it's making my brain hurt a little bit to try and understand sort of how, how it's currently taxed and utilized, and whether that's appropriate, and how do we think about business use. So I agree with your sentiments, Commissioner Kelly, that I'm afraid we're on a little bit of a slippery slope with the types of businesses, and sometimes it's been a little bit more clear cut because it is an at-home business and because it is sort of such a small, low impact use. And that's a little bit debatable in this instance. I don't think, to me, what's been described is significantly, it's not significant high impact, especially given that's a relatively densely populated part of our unincorporated area. There's quite a few residences there compared to some other parts of the unincorporated areas. So there's naturally more traffic. So then that gets us back to the space of what is a fair share for such a significant amount of road frontage or road that is utilized by multiple residents. And to Catherine's point about some of the earlier public comments during the planning commission meeting that, some residences have multiple adults or driver age folks who are in multiple vehicles leaving multiple times a day. And so it gets really tricky to figure out what that fairness is. I certainly don't think that to Catherine's math about that, to the nearest paved road language, 14,000 plus feet is $21,000+. And that is really significant and extremely above and beyond certainly what I would expect if we were to index sort of all of the business uses where we required the dust control. I can't imagine any number comes close to that. So I suppose therein lies the detail that we're stuck on, but those are my thoughts. I support this use of the land and think that staff are responding in a way that is about bringing folks into compliance, bringing property owners into compliance with our codes based on how they're using the land and giving us some accountability measures. I will say I appreciate the applicant's suggestion that though it comes with more staff burden, but the suggestion of a more frequent review and maybe the ability to find a way to assess what traffic looks like to and from the business, but I don't know how significant that information is either.
Kind of getting to what you're talking about, Commissioner Reed, if there's, a use that we think falls below where dust palliative might be appropriate for business expense, like the current, 2 days out of the week where you have a session or two, maybe when it goes beyond that, if it's 3 days or 4 days a week, when maybe that's the trigger that we could build in without necessarily having staff review. Those are complaint based. So it'd be people saying, hey, we don't like what we're seeing, or the applicant coming and saying, hey, I've got to go to 4. So it's going to trigger this next use. I have a question for Catherine. So as the crow flies, it's like 3/4 of a mile from part of the incorporated part of the city of Eudora. What is this area included in the city's growth plan within the next 20 years? Are these roads likely to get paved and put to city standards in the near future?
I don't know about likelihood of getting paid, but it is in their review area, and they did weigh in. They sent their communications to the Planning Commission. They did hold a public hearing of their own on this item, and they did not find that it would have any significant impacts to the city of Eudora or its growth area. And they didn't have any further comment for the Board of County Commission meeting. So.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to wade into some ground. I'm not sure I want to. So Sarah, if I misstep, pull me back. It seems like we've recognized that there's a cost to the community for this business to operate. And we've identified that cost as being dust palliative. I agree that, and my thinking is if we decide to go ahead with this, I don't think this business owns the responsibility to put dust palliative on all the road in all 3 directions. That assumes that they're the only ones using that road, and they certainly aren't. Is there a way, and I don't know if conditions are to work in payment in lieu of taxes, because this is not taxable, so because I don't like the way the last condition is written. It's incredibly nebulous. I don't know how that happened, Catherine, but it says they'll just work with the township, and I don't think that gives any comfort. I mean, maybe it does, but if I was a neighbor, I'd be like, well, what does this mean? And how much work will be done there? It's sort of, I don't know if there's a clearer way to say that. And maybe my colleagues have some ideas as well. I'm starting to get down to, we have to tell the applicant what the expectation for them is and the cost of doing the dust palliative. Just saying they'll do something, I think puts something over their business's head that I'm not sure how they work out. If commissioners have something they want to suggest in there, I was just offering that as an idea, and I have lots of bad ideas. So
I think maybe a step towards that direction would be to ask Catherine. There are 3 routes to this site, all of which are about equal distant-ish to a paved road. Which one would be your recommendation as the one that they would, oh, I think her headset's not working. is there one route that you would recommend over the others?
Sorry about that. My headphone just quit out, so I had to plug it in. I think I heard you say at the end there that you were asking about the recommended route because there are multiple routes. Okay.
Yes, please.
Well, I believe on their website, according, to the township trustee, their website states that primarily their customers are currently coming from North 1200 Road and then south to their property on East 2100 Road. I would suggest that unless they have a different route that they intend, that would probably be the most likely route since they're already telling their customers that's the route. So
Is that also the route with the fewest homes?
no, that's actually the route probably with the most homes because most of the homes are located on the East 2100 Road and on that side of the road. And there is more distance to the north than there is to the south from 2100.
It seems like the North 1100 Road route has far fewer homes on it and might be, if we're talking about dust palliative
Mhm.
impact on homes, I don't know that doing the entire route makes sense for a business of this size when we've not asked it of any other business except Ham Quarry, maybe in a different realm.
So
that starting
that's
with
a
the
good
route that
suggestion. Yeah.
might have the fewest homes might be at least a place to begin.
Catherine, do you, and if you said it earlier and I might have missed it in my notes, sort of distances of those different routes?
I do. So if you're going north, so basically the total distance on East 2100 Road is 5,260 feet. And then if you're going the north route, you would also have 3,900 feet to the nearest paved road on North 1200. If you're going to the south, you have approximately a third of that 5,260 and then 5,300 linear feet to the East 2200 Road to the east. So that's approximately 7,000 linear feet.
Including about a half mile of which that doesn't have homes. Within, between a large farm and then a home that's not a driveway, it's on a road east, 2135 road.
Correct.
I think it's possible that this might be Mr. Gabriel's farm that I'm looking at here on the corner. Is that right? At North 1100 and East 2200. It's okay. Sorry. But it's looks like a pretty large base of operations. It probably is carrying far more traffic than any Wilderness Kids is likely to have. So I'm just kind of looking at like what's practical that also gets to the people that would be impacted, but is not overly burdensome. And I'm kind of looking at basically a half mile from their driveway south to North 1100 Road, and then east past the two homes, some of which may already be paying for dust palliative, in which case maybe that could be worked out that they only pay a percentage of that and share it with those neighbors. I'm done. I'll pass it to the others.
Can I
So,
say one other thing
yes.
to that? Yeah, I was also going to say, and this may tie into Commissioner Kelly's comment earlier about how the condition is seemingly nebulous, but I think part of the reason why it's a little nebulous is because there may be multiple methods or multiple sprays, multiple suppliers that are providing that mitigation. And so working with the county for their current methods is why I think it is worded the way it is. And I think maybe, and this is just a staff recommendation to you all, if you're looking for maybe the cleanest way to kind of craft a better fitting condition would be to designate a time, like yearly or whatever, designate a route, and then designate that they work with the county for current mitigation method, something to that effect, if that helps.
We have a recommendation from staff.
If you're trying to figure out how you're going to specifically word the condition to approve it along that regard, I don't have public work staff here and there's some flexibility, when we apply. So saying the time of year that this is going to be applied, like you say May, that might be the wrong time. So I'm a little nervous about the time frame. I think you could pick a designated route. I think that's super helpful. And then, so I guess the question is if you're trying to get it more precise so that it's, we know exactly when it's going to be done, on what stretch of road, for how much point, like, I don't know that I can do that tonight. If you're okay with something more generalized, but maybe not the same way the conditions worded right now, I think we could try to craft it and approve it tonight.
Sarah, isn't there, is it 2 general times a year at which people, I know that there's some variables going on and complications currently recently, but generally speaking, oh, these new mics are hot. Generally speaking, there's sort of a cadence to which, to when folks are requesting townships and county assistance with dust
Yes.
care, right? Approximately what seasons,
I mean,
time of year? Is
Jim
that-
might
does that
know
really
better
vary
than I do.
across-
Jim, you got to come up to the mic. Sorry.
Thanks for
Jim.
being involved in
Yeah.
our meeting and discussion.
Glad
Jim.
you're here.
I think they send the request forms out in March.
Okay.
To who wants it, but then they spray it, they shoot for the beginning of May. And
Kinda when
that's
the
why
rain
they can get
stops.
a better, cheaper if they have the whole county, then they can get a bulk discount.
Yeah, thank you. That's the sort of spring timeline I was trying to think about. So
Okay,
If
Commissioner.
it's a
so-
wet spring, it may wait. I'm just want to make sure folks understand that. Yeah.
So if we put the condition on that would be along 1100 road, homes could ask for palliative to be put down because that's the route. And that would be the cost responsibility for that would be with the applicant. Give me a reaction to that. Trying to get a end here in mind.
I think it is the most logical route. The entire duration still seems like a stretch for the use, if it's just 2 days a week. Whereas a home that is occupied is used, 7 days a week with multiple kinds of traffic. So maybe it is something that, within two, if it's just 2 to 4 sessions, total 6 kids at a time, that doesn't trigger it, but anything larger maybe does. And just so that we can give some knowns both to the neighborhood and also to the business for like, what's this going to cost?
Yeah, I don't know how we manage that. I mean, I think we just have to say, because otherwise we're gonna create conflict there on whether they're having 2 or 4 or 6 or 27 sessions. And I don't want to create more strife in the neighborhood. I think if we say, and I'm a little out of my zone here when it comes to dust palliative, I'm just trying to get us locked into it, an answer. If we say that, that homes along that stretch it sounds like they turn in a form asking for it, Jim. Yeah. They one time a year. That time is determined whenever it happens. And that one time a year houses along 1100 road can ask for that. And that would be paid for by the applicant that's it. That's all I'm suggesting. So, because I don't think we want to do it all the way along the route. It's just in front of those homes.
Particular width or distance in front of those homes, or do you want to get that far in the weeds? I like where you're going.
I don't really want to get in the weeds on that. I sort of want to leave that. I have a feeling that there's the applicant, I think I'm watching the applicant's face here. I think the applicant knows there's going to be a cost there, right? How we don't want it to be the entire stretch. We're trying to get it down to a reasonable amount, but I also don't want to put limits and tell our public works people exactly how many feet they have to measure in front of each house. So I'm trying to keep it tight, but also loose enough that people can do their jobs.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Kelly, and I think it's a good suggestion, and it also feels sort of like it aligns with that what's the word that I'm looking for? I guess just that level of actual sort of tangible work amongst neighbors to figure out sometimes shared costs, as we heard from the township. board member that is sometimes what the situation is. So I want us to leave flexibility for that and sort of hope for and assume that maybe there's opportunities on this specified route that minimizes the number of houses. And then there will be opportunity for them to figure out what is a fair share of that cost. And it sort of mitigates issues all around, I think, and is well within our authority, and helps narrow some of that nebulous language that Commissioner Kelly was talking about, while still leaving, I guess, enough flexibility for there to be neighbors and township folks, figuring out those specifics, year after year.
Catherine, I'm looking at you here in terms of emotion. So what I hear is that we would designate a route along North 1100 Road, and that would be written into the CUP as a condition. And that the applicant would, neighbors along that route could request dust palliative in accordance with township and county dust palliative program annually.
Yes, I think,
And-
yes.
And to be paid for by the applicant. Hope someone's writing that down.
Yes, that's where I was going with my suggestion.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Sarah, we started off talking a little bit about taxation for that use. So presumably it's been taxed as ag when it was kind of vacant land and now it's got a use on it. How will that, what will that be taxed as? Will it still be taxed as ag, taxed as something else?
I don't think it's taxed as ag, Commissioner Kelly. I wish I had the appraiser here to specifically ask. My impression is that without it, I don't know that this will qualify as an ag use, under my understanding of ag use.
That's news to me because I thought it was the underlying code, but I learn something new every day. Okay.
Well, zoning code and tax code
Yeah,
are
it's
different.
things. So,
And so,
okay.
so I don't,
But I would love to go down that rabbit hole a little bit. I mean, in the future,
Yeah.
and it clarify that, because that was a big theme of my thought throughout preparation for this meeting and reading through the materials. And I don't fully understand it. So I would like to understand it better.
Maybe we could have a future work session.
or I can try to
after
see if the
budget.
appraiser can maybe
Yeah.
even just give us a memo that
Memo.
kind of clarifies some of that. But I do know that there are times where the taxation use doesn't always match the zoning code.
And I guess that's kind of getting at like, how much are they already going to be paying for the road? And are we just adding on top of that if it's already going to be covered in regular taxation? And I don't want to overburden. I also don't want to overburden neighbors.
Yeah, the hard part too is generally from a taxation purpose, it's going to be valued off the value of the property. So there's not a lot of improvement on the property. So it may be a business use, but taxed pretty low, but maybe at a higher rate than, but yeah, we're out of my element here and where I'd love to have the appraiser and I can visit with him and see if we can get some follow-up. I think everybody would appreciate that clarity.
Okay, so we're getting close to a motion here. I want to check in with the applicant because you always have the opportunity to withdraw your application. If the road we're going down, no pun intended there, the road that we're going down is not where you want to go, now would be the time to withdraw your application. Otherwise, we're going to make this motion. Sure.
Whenever we change conditions, I do like to
Yeah.
ask the applicant, what all we've really done here. So get a reaction from you. So yes, please.
Okay. So I think I've heard a lot of like how I'm feeling from you all in that, yes, I want to support our business. But also want to make sure that the neighbors feel that all is fair. And that word fair is like, this is tricky, like, but I also kind of need to know a number, because if you tell me that we have to pay $10,000, then our business is not going to survive. And I've just kind of mentally prepared myself that maybe that might be what happens. Darn it. I had one more thought, but. So that was one of my questions, was like, do we have a number of feet that we're going to be responsible for? Because I think what I was hearing, the route that we go, I mean, I think the route we're talking about goes by Travis's house. Yes. So I think there's 3 houses there, and then we're saying 2 more around the corner. I'm just going to assume that all 5 of those houses want us to pay for it. I'm just going to make that assumption. Which I understand that. It just comes down to the numbers, you know, especially if we just like currently only have a few families. And yes, we would like to grow, but again, even if we grow and the fee is 10,000 a year plus all the other costs that, you know, we put into the business, like, it's just not probably gonna work. So what I'm asking is, can I have a little bit more of an idea? of
So
what-
we probably don't have the expertise here to give you that idea. I mean, we could go down that rabbit hole, but I'm not sure we want to. We don't have our county works, public works director here. So what we could do, another option, don't always love these, is to defer this and have, or that's one option. Another option is to work with the applicant so that you understand what that cost is, work with county public works and the township to understand what that cost is. And then, you know, you may have a CUP, but you never use it. You just decide that's not I'm not going to do that. It goes away. Those are kind of our 2 options. So.
Commissioner Kelly, I think we can get a little bit closer. We've only got, I don't know, 5 or 6 homes. Maybe they each need 100 feet in front of them. That is the dust palliative. Even if we did, 1,000 feet total, like not to exceed 1,000 feet. I think if you added up all the homes, there'd probably still be dust palliative left to put in front of the business itself. I think there's a lot of space in between homes out there that I don't think we're trying to have her be burdened with. So I think maybe that would start dialing it in to be about $1,500 based on what we have in front of us. It's okay. Sorry, Catherine.
I was going to try to help you out a little bit here, and you could still word the condition based on the route, but put a cap on it if you chose. I was going to give you the rough estimate for the distance. I did pull it up from their property to the corner of East 2100 Road to North 1100 Road, which covers 4 residences along that route. That is 1,300 linear feet covering their property to the corner. And then if you wanted to include the next residence, which is along North 1100 Road, and I'm just giving you rough distance, that is an additional 1,700 feet. So those are your ballparks. And I did confirm with the Public Works Director today that it is approximately $1.50 per linear foot. So that does give
This
you a general.
year.
Yeah, this year, just this year.
So
Yes.
it will change in the future.
Yes. So that would at least give you a ballpark on a maximum amount for this year.
I have another question. I've just heard from neighbors that the county, because of, I could be saying this wrong, because of bridge closures or whatnot, was going to cover palliative care of the 2100 road this year. Does that mean that that's still going to happen, or just because we're a business coming in now that's going to go away and we have to pay? I don't, even if we had a year to just like get our bearings to know if this is even going to be a business that survives in this area.
So I'll just say, I appreciate all that discussion. This is a land use. We got to stay on land use here, and whether it's an appropriate land use and the conditions that we're coming up with. I appreciate that you're trying to make the balance sheet of your business work. I get that, but that's really sticky territory for us, because then future applications come in and it's like, well, I only have this much and I can't, and we begin to negotiate that. That's why I'm not real comfortable with a discussion on how much it costs and the price could change next year. And, you know, I think we have to set the conditions and then you have to just decide whether that's a business that you can afford to run with those conditions in place. That's just my feeling, commissioners. I think we could do a bunch of math here and figure out feet and all that, but I think we're getting too deep in the weeds and something we have that staff can do.
I think maybe what we're hearing then is that deferring, getting those numbers so that it is a known thing. Is that where you're heading, Commissioner Kelly? Because I think it's entirely possible that the county is already planning to do that, and paying for it twice is not something that we're looking to have done.
I don't think anyone would make somebody pay twice. So I don't think that's the intent. I mean, we generally don't do that, but I guess I just want to, even if we defer this and try to come up with a precise amount, the amount will change from year to year. So like I can't guarantee you for 5 years, it's always going to be this amount. So that's where I feel a little bit of nervousness about that part of the operation. But if the commission's comfortable with deferring, I will need probably more than a next week to get these answers figured out and get it ready back to the commission.
So I'll just say, like, if an option, if I say, no, I don't want to defer, I want to continue to move forward. But then knowing if we receive the permit and then I do the numbers and I'm like, I don't know if I work with Catherine, who I'm going to continue to get these answers from. But if we decide that we're not going to move forward, then the permit just becomes null and void and we sell the
Yep.
property and go on our merry way.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to come back to, because I think that, you know, to Commissioner Kelly's comment earlier, you know, at sort of the invitation of you to let us know based on our discussion, if you feel like you want to withdraw, I don't think that that's necessary. I think that we can change that 8th condition a bit based on the conversation we've had in a way that is appropriate for this body to do based on the question before us. And then that will give you information to proceed with. And whether it's a matter of months or after some years, that becomes untenable for you. You know, there's no penalty for not using the permit that you received, right? Which is not to minimize that there is labor and time and resources put into this permitting application process. And I acknowledge that and acknowledge that there's that it's very personal for you and there's a lot of factors for you to consider. To Commissioner Kelly's point, we have a very particular factor and sort of authority in front of us to consider. And I think that getting into the math of it is a little sticky. I feel tempted by the notion of, you know, not exceeding a certain amount of linear feet, but I feel like we aren't the experts in that. We don't have enough information in front of us other than some general ranges of what residents typically ask for their own road frontage. And I don't think that's enough information for us to make an informed sort of limit to that. So I think that we have to keep it nebulous enough, to use that word again, so that it can be sort of decided amongst you and your neighbors at this point, the neighbors that will share that route and the township, and then make choices for your business based on that. So I'm personally I don't think deferral is necessary. I think that we've, in my opinion, sort of sussed out what the issue is. And then we, you know, as a sidebar, have some sort of larger themes and issues to discuss about business use in our unincorporated area beyond this one.
So I'm going to push us ahead and make a motion to recommend approval of CUP 230081 outdoor recreation facility located at East 1200 Road with the conditions outlined in the staff report, with the exception of the last condition, which will be written to reflect that there will be a required route on 1100 Road that the applicant will notify her customers of, or their customers of. Neighbors will have one opportunity annually to request dust palliative, and the cost in front of their homes, and the cost of that will be paid for by the applicant. Did I give you enough there, Catherine? I want to check in with you. Okay.
Second. Oops.
Just a quick,
Mhm.
does that give the language in there to kind of work out where that would be with, I mean, in front of the homes doesn't mean the entire route. Can we kind of?
That's what I said, in front of the homes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any other discussion?
Nope.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Passes 3-0. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to our second item. Commissioners, at 7 o'clock. We want to keep pushing forward. Okay. This is a conditional use permit CUP 23-00078 for vacation rental use at 1017 East 1600 Road. Hi, Kyle.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, commissioners. This is Kyle Kobe with the Planning Department. As was just stated, this is a conditional use permit application, CUP -23-00078 for vacation rental use at 1017 East 1600 Road. The subject property is zoned CP Cluster Preservation District, and the existing use of the property is a detached dwelling, as are all of the immediately surrounding properties. Though the subject property also abuts AG2 Transitional Agricultural District zoning on the west side. No exterior physical changes to the property are proposed with this application. The existing structure complies with setback standards. Parking requirements for vacation rental uses is 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit. Since there's only 1 dwelling unit, the parking requirement is just 2 spaces, and sufficient parking is available on site right now. The applicant has indicated that only the residential structure on the eastern portion of the property would be used for the vacation rental use, and that the property owners directly adjacent to the north will serve as property managers when the owners are away. Documents submitted by the applicant also indicate that a maximum total occupancy of guests will be set at 7, with no more than 4 adults allowed at any given time. Several conditions of approval are shown in your staff report for this item and in the resolution. These conditions were taken from the most recent vacation rental use CUP application and are exactly the same as were approved by the Board of County Commissioners with that item. During their April 24th meeting, the Planning Commission heard this item and voted 8-0 to forward a recommendation for approval to you. And as you are no doubt noted, planning staff is recommending approval of CUP 23-00078 to allow vacation rental use at 1017 East 1600 Road. That's based on the findings of fact found in the body of the staff report and subject to the conditions listed in the staff report. So this concludes my presentation. I know it was very brief, but there's additional information available in your agenda packet for this item. I'll be available to answer questions, and I believe the applicant is attending via Zoom.
The applicants in the panel, Kyle, did you mean to share your screen?
I'm
I'm here. Hi, Kyle.
Okay.
Hello, sorry. Yeah, no, that's not me that's sharing my screen.
Okay.
That's
Janet.
me.
Hi,
Yeah.
Janet. This is
Hi.
Commissioner Kelly.
Hello, Commissioner.
Were you wanting to share something with us?
No, I wanted to make sure you knew I was available for questions or comments, and I'm here to answer.
Great. Can you stop sharing your screen?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. You're welcome to provide comment now if you'd like. You don't have to, but you certainly can.
Okay. Just in a nutshell, my husband and I are interested in beginning this Airbnb. It's not going to be an Airbnb. It's going to be a VRBO. We feel like that's a better vetted system to use. And it's our only residence. We're going to be renting it out as I travel for treatment, as we travel to see grandkids. It's essentially to supplement our income as I'm not able to work now. And I think that's just about it.
Thank you, Janet.
You're welcome.
Commissioners, any questions for the applicant or for Kyle? All right, seeing none. Is there anyone here public comment on this item? No one online, Sarah? Okay. Commissioners, bringing it back up to us for discussion, motions.
I do appreciate seeing some familiar recommended conditions. So I'm willing to move forward. All right, I move to approve conditional use permit CUP 22-78 for vacation rental use based on the findings of fact found in the body of the staff report and subject to the conditions listed in the staff report, and adopt the resolution.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Nope.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Kyle. Janet, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Kyle, thank you again.
Okay, we'll move on to item 3, which is our racial equity initiative update. And is this Jill? Hi, Jill.
Hello, good evening, Commissioners. Jill Joliker, Assistant County Administrator. Wanted to just take a couple minutes to give you all an update on the County Administrator's Office efforts regarding racial equity initiatives. Those initiatives have been diverse and, you know, at times they've had peaks and valleys. But as I laid out in the background memo, it started with our organization joining the Government Alliance for Race and Equity in early 2020 and experiencing the ups and downs of that organization, along with the ups and downs of local governments at all levels in 2020 and up until today. And I kind of spelled out what the role of the GARE is, what it was then, and how it's transitioned to today, and the work that they've done with us and the work that we'll continue to do with them as an organization, and the value that we hope to continue to get out of that, being a member of that organization through the network, participating in the network, understanding and observing and participating in discussions with peers around the country that are trying to do this work and experiment with good intent and learn from one another. And one thing I want to mention recently is that GARE's done some exciting work around housing equity that's really been emerging as a new focus area for them that has gotten a lot of attention from some of the folks that are working on the housing and homelessness strategic plan with the city of Lawrence. So our peers, even locally, are paying attention to what's going on in that network and how we can learn. There'll continue to be some professional development opportunities that we'll be able to take advantage of, and in partnership with the HR manager, Michelle Spreer. As I shared in the memo, we're going to be participating in our second biannual county employee racial equity employee survey and see what's shifted, what new areas we may need to focus on, and think more intentionally about. The last survey was the first survey we did, so the second one will hopefully give us a little more information. The other initiative that some of the other examples that I provided in my memo was related to the work that Criminal Justice Coordinating Council has done related to trying to understand the racial disparities that exist in our criminal justice system. I spelled some of that out, and my colleague Katie Fitzgerald is here to talk about any aspects of that or answer any questions if commissioners have them. And then that leads me to the last thing that I mentioned in the memo, which is Katie and I's kind of mutual learnings around some alternative frameworks that we can start thinking about to help us better understand and get more upstream, like we talk about in the Housing and Homelessness Strategic Plan. Look at some of the root causes, look at some of the systemic impacts that are resulting in the disparities that we see in a variety of ways, whether that's our criminal justice system, health outcomes, homelessness, and many more. The structural well-being framework comes from the Haywood Burns Institute. Katie's had some experience working with them in a previous capacity in North Carolina, so she had some awareness of them. And I had some awareness of them based on some work that they've done in the past 5 years with the state of Kansas around the racial disparities that exist for families that are involved in the child welfare system, and understanding the root causes of that as it relates to poverty and racism in this country. So I had some awareness of them in that capacity. And I know that that Pam Wiegand has had some awareness of Haywood Burns Institute as it relates to some of the work regarding juvenile justice reform. So it's a framework that we're studying further. We've had some initial conversations with the team at Burns Institute to just understand what an engagement could look like. And we're going to keep thinking about that and trying to understand what would make sense for us locally. But thought it was important just to give you all a sense of where we're at with our initiatives. We're still kind of struggling where we can have the most, how we can have impact given the capacity of our organization and all the things that are going on. I think one thing that we keep coming back to, whether that's myself or Katie or some of our colleagues on our various projects that we're working on, is we continue to see disparities in various systems, but we're struggling to understand how we can make impact and what would progress look like. And we don't want to assume that we have the answers. And so that's our update. Katie, if you have anything else you want to offer? Probably not. Okay, well, we stand for questions. Any ideas or comments that commissioners have, that's where we're at.
Get you questions. We'll take public comment on this as well, but questions, commissioners, for Jill or Katie or? Yeah, can you talk to me? I really enjoyed reading about the Hayward Institute. I think I was really impressed with the language that they used and how they're approaching this. Is that something that you think we want to use? Is that something you think we may contract? I was trying to understand how we may engage with that work.
So the example case study that I gave you for Ramsey County is the best example of what an engagement would look like for Douglas County. Obviously, Ramsey County is a lot bigger. It's a different community, but Katie and I have spent some time last month having some conversations with the staff from the county manager's office with Ramsey County, and just help us understand how you got here. Why was this the approach that worked? And why are you going to invest in your second cohort? They talk about that they're going to move into their second cohort. I think the case study gives a great example of you don't know what you're getting. You don't know the outcomes of it. You're investing in a process. And the process that, for starters, is laid out in the case study with Ramsey County. And based on the conversation Katie and I had, it has a lot of merit. If we have the opportunity and there is direction from the commission or others that this is a path we want to go down as it relates to a better understanding of whether it's racial disparities in our criminal justice system, racial disparities in our housing and homelessness system. I didn't mention economic well-being and entrepreneurism. We focus a lot on that in February when we had E3 Cities event. It truly takes a larger view of that, and it engages our community perhaps in a new way. I think what's difficult is making sure we are able to get, if we were to go down this path, like getting the stakeholders involved, that we'd want to have involved in the process. But based on our conversation with Ramsey County, that was not difficult at all. It was surprisingly easy. But it's a time commitment, and that's something that we have to be mindful of as well. So there's a lot of factors we'd have to think of, but this is just an approach we're thinking of. So we are at least thinking of something that what is our work beyond checking these are my words, checking a box and saying, well, we're a member of the Government Alliance for Race and Equity. But we are trying to get more explicit in using a racial equity frame in our, whether it's the Housing and Homelessness Strategic Plan, the Anti-Poverty Community Health Plan, and others. I think that we are making progress in smaller ways.
So I'd like staff to have a little more time to we wanted to update commissioners and let commissioners know that we're exploring this path, but I'd like, from a staff perspective, for us to more fully flesh out what a potential partnership would look like and maybe some options, and then bring something like that back to the commission for further consideration. So I don't think we're quite ready to put that on an agenda next week, but I think just wanted to give you, if yeah, heads up that that's sort of the direction we're headed and bring something more refined or precise back to you.
And Jill, you did say that that survey to the employees is going to happen again soon. What's the time frame for that?
We're going to do that in the fall is what where we're on the GARE schedule. Yeah.
I'll be curious to see, because it kind of showed that, you know, the heart and the intent is there, but the tools are not strong yet. So I'm curious to see if there's a shift in that, if people are feeling more empowered and feeling like they're having some tools, because I think there's been a lot of intention about being practical with how to move forward. So be curious to see how that pans out and also where we go from there.
Absolutely. And one thing I wanted to share too is that, you know, Katie and I had a good discussion with Dr. Muhammad with the city of Lawrence last week or the week before, just to, you know, see where he's at with things and how we can be, you know, how we can work together on things and where we are at with our projects. And we talked about the Burns Institute approach. And, you know, we really got to, my sense was there's a lot of support to continue to think collectively as local government together from him. But it did sound like there's a lot of focus on his part on organizational development needs. Obviously a different and larger organization, but we are in communication with Dr. Muhammad as well. And we've had some conversations with staff at Burns Institute about what a partnership, what a contract could look like. So we've done some initial work there too. But like Sarah did a nice job. Sarah made, you know, we owed you all an update on all the other things that we've done historically as well before we got to the next step.
Okay, this is a regular agenda item. Is there anyone here who'd like to provide public comment on this item? Anyone online? Okay, I just, as a comment, Jill, I think you sell yourself and your team a little short on not making the progress that you would like to make. I think my evidence is, you know, we did quite a lot through the ARPA process, and I think that those were questions that we weren't asking before. And today at the PERC meeting, we heard applications coming into the city, you know, for economic development, and questions about racial equity were being asked there. So while we may not be moving as fast as we all would like, I think all of our aspirations are that those inequalities don't show up, those disparities don't show up. But I do feel, and I'm hoping that your survey in the fall shows it, and I expect it will, that until you understand that there is work to do, it's hard to do the work, right? And so I see progress in our community, not as fast as I would like either. But I don't want you and your team to feel defeated. I think this work is really great work to do. It's a not great. That is so lame. It is not just great work to do. It is core to what we believe at Douglas County. And I'm just grateful for the work you're doing. Don't sell yourself short on that.
Yeah, I agree. And to put a point on it, I think context matters, right? So we have to appreciate the fact that relatively speaking, this is a very new conversation for a local government or local governments in the instance of working with our municipal partners too, to be having, right? It's been an avoided topic for forever, since the beginning of local governments, right? And governments built on systems of violent racism. And so there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to try and transform. And so I think it's human nature to get, you know, sort of frustrated at the slow pace of things. Maybe fatigued because you're not seeing such tangible results, or it's hard to identify what has changed or where have we moved the needle, or how do we define an objective. And that's all. I mean, it's just kind of it's messy by nature. And there's patience and stamina that is required in that process. So I appreciate that we are staying in the conversation, right? That we are recognizing, looking back and seeing, where did GARE get us? What tools did that give us? how have we started to get more comfortable with these conversations, see where the systemic issues lie, and then look for the sort of tools to rework that. We're doing that work. It is going to be slow and arduous, and everybody is going to want it to feel better sooner. And we have literally hundreds of years of racist systemic structures to try and transform. So I just want to acknowledge that that's a piece of it, and the stamina and the commitment to stay in the discomfort along the way is what matters to me personally, and what I think is, you know, there's the saying in community organizing that you can only move at the speed of trust, and there's been a lot of trust building going on, and that work has to continue too, because we can't make big movements and big transformational changes without that foundational trust amongst stakeholders and the different people who have impact on these issues directly. One other thing I want to, well, I'll just read it because I highlighted it. I'm a little bit familiar with the this framework, and excited that y'all are exploring whether or not it feels like a good fit. And the reason I like it so much is because it has that structural lens. And so, you know, the line that you pulled from their website, the framework activates an intentional cross-sector process steeped in services, restorative practices, and humanity, rather than custody, control, and suppression. And to me, that just really gets at the fact that we have to, you know, if we sort of unpack that backwards, acknowledge that by design, our government and all the parts of it and the things we are statutorily required to do in the way that we function are rooted in custody, control, and suppression, quite frankly. And so there's, you know, only so much we can do to start to change how that looks, but to change how we're looking at it and put a different lens on it is a significant first step. So anyway, excited to hear future thoughts from staff about whether or not this feels like a good fit. And I think that in addition to the internal sort of interrogation of ourselves and how we function as an organization, and then how we are supporting change in our criminal justice system, that, you know, to much of your credit, Jill, and to your point about how a lot of these discussions have been helpful and instrumental in the housing and homelessness stakeholder conversations and working towards a strategic plan. We have the ability to lead by example with our community partners, specifically in human and social services, right? And all the shelter systems, the crisis system, you know, that full continuum of care as an organization of our size, and that interacts with all of those players so frequently and has built pretty trust-based relationships, especially in recent years. There's a real opportunity for us to lead by example in that space and help those agencies and those smaller organizations, you know, do an inventory of their own, right? And be able to, you know, we can share some of those tools and really helping folks recognize their own organizational structure and what it, you know, what some of the systemic rooted issues are and how to start to transform those along with us as governments. So I'm hopeful about that work because I think we have a lot of power and influence in that space. So good work.
Okay. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Jill. I want to apologize. I used an improper term that I should not use. I was sloppy, and going back, sometimes that is ableist language to say the word lame. I apologize for that. So that was poor on my junior highness came back all of a sudden there, and I can learn more and I can do better. So I apologize for saying that. Next on our agenda is an end of session update from Little Government Relations. And Mallory is here. Welcome, Mallory. We're glad to see you again.
I'm very glad to be here because it means that the legislature has gone home. So Mallory Lutz with Little Government Relations. I feel like I say this every time, but my update, I think, will be pretty brief tonight since I know Stuart was here basically a month ago to update you on activities related to first adjournment, And of course, as you know from our report last week, the legislature has adjourned sine die. And so I am here tonight to basically hit the highlights of the very short 3-day veto session, talk about a couple of pieces of legislation that are kind of still unresolved at this point, and then talk a little bit about what we might expect to see again next year. So highlights of veto session. The legislature failed twice. I'm sure you saw a lot about this in the news to override the major tax legislation of this session. It was substitute for Senate Bill 169. I won't go through the laundry list of provisions that bill included, but that would have been the 5.15% single tax bracket. It would have eliminated the state sales tax on food to zero by January of 2024, which is basically would have been a year earlier than what is in current law now. Would have smoothed out the Social Security income tax cliff and provided for an increase in the standard deduction related to the cost of living adjustment. So legislature went home without any kind of major tax policy, which is kind of unusual. Next thing they did was they passed the K-12 education budget. I have a caveat on this one because this is one of the bills that the governor has not yet approved. So I don't even want to verbalize it, but there is a small chance, of course, for a special session. So what the legislature did differently this year is instead of setting that ceremonial end of session, what is called sine die, for about 2 weeks out to give the governor that time to veto bills, they set it the same day that they left, which means if she does veto anything, the legislature would have to come back to deal with it if they so choose. But if it's the education budget, a special session would have to be called, or else schools will have no money by July 1st. So kind of those three options that she has: she can approve it either by just letting it become law or signing it. She can veto it, or technically, because it is an appropriations bill, she can line item veto it, though if you ask different people, they have different opinions on that. So I'm not suggesting she's going to do one thing or another. But I certainly am hopeful that we aren't headed for a special session selfishly with vacation plans. But other significant vetoes that were sustained that the legislature failed to override, there was a pretty significant childcare licensing bill that would have made some pretty significant changes to staff ratios and those sorts of things. Elimination of the 3-day grace period for mail-in ballots. The governor vetoed that. The veto was sustained. And then Eddie Eagle firearm safety curriculum that she has, I think, vetoed the last at least 2 years. And the legislature did not override that. A couple of items that the legislature did override, couple of abortion-related bills, gender-related bills, and then one I wanted to specifically mention, Senate Bill 228. You'll probably recall that number from our reports. That's the bill related to county jails. And this also now includes reimbursement to counties for those costs associated with individuals awaiting mental health competency and evaluation and treatment. I would note a couple of victories, and I'm sure these are things that Stuart noted as well, but when you're in this kind of 4-month thing, I think it's important to remember some of the things that were good that happened and some of the bad things that were dodged. So of course, always local control items to contend with. The plastic bag bill managed to kind of escape that for yet another year, as well as larger efforts to kind of prohibit local governments from regulating other goods and services. Partisan election bill, I think I mentioned at one point when I was over here, that failed in the Senate as well. After a couple, we've seen that come up several years. ESG legislation, the environmental, social, and governance. At this point, it seems like it will probably have pretty minimal impact on your day-to-day contracting and things of that sort. Some pretty exciting common consumption language was passed, brought by City of Topeka, and so gives municipalities greater flexibility whether or not they want to close streets. And then, of course, the election commissioner legislation, I think, was another big victory. I would note today the governor did sign House Bill 2002. I'm not necessarily including this under good or bad things that happened, but I did want to make note of it since it just happened earlier this afternoon. This is kind of a broader sales tax exemption bill for some different agencies. It would be area agencies on aging and then the Kansas Suicide Prevention headquarters. One other piece of interest in this was the provisions of House Bill 2317. This is the opting in email authority for valuation notices and the tax statements that are currently in the R&R notice. And with that, I will talk a little bit about what remains unresolved. So as I stated earlier, the K-12 education budget, waiting to see what the governor does with that. And then two other bills, Senate Bill 8. This includes the government competition provisions from Senate Bill 252. And so we're pretty confident that that will be vetoed. She has until, I wrote this down somewhere, the 14th. So when a bill gets to the governor's desk, she has 10 calendar days to veto. That just got to her desk on Friday. So she has a few more days to deal with that. And then a public health bill that kind of been watching for the entire session. It ended up being House Bill 2285. This is that bill that limits not only KDHE's authority to respond to disease outbreaks, but also the authority of your local health officer. Basically everything that county public health does now or can do now would really just become a recommendation. I won't go into all the details of that bill because I do believe it will be vetoed. And that very, very, very narrowly passed the House. So couple of things that we think will come back again next year. Always renewed efforts to limit local control. I don't think that's surprising to anybody, but probably particularly related to those consumer goods and plastic bags and things of that sort. And probably lots of property tax topics since a lot of those things didn't get accomplished this year. So particularly if the government competition bill does get vetoed, I'm quite sure that will come back again next year. And then there is a constitutional amendment that would limit valuation of property to no more than 4% a year. That did pass the Senate this year. The House said we don't have time to deal with that this year, but we'll take it up next year. So it did pass the Senate with the 2/3 required majority to get something onto the ballot. So if the House does take it up next year and pass it, it will go to the voters. So that's all I have. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Mallory? Mallory, can you give us any sort of update on what happened on the Peasley Tech bill that just sort of died?
Yes, basically the same story as last year. Had a hearing and didn't go anywhere, and same thing this year. I know there were maybe some efforts to try to get it bundled in conference committee with some other community college, tech college related legislation, and that didn't happen. So.
Regular agenda item. Anyone have public comment on this item? Anyone online? Okay. Thank you, Mallory.
Thank you.
All right. That finishes our agenda. We'll move on to appointments. Commissioners, any word on appointments? Don't forget we have those planning commissioners at the end of May.
I got one.
All right.
So I did have a conversation with Planning Commissioner Mike Kelso, and he is willing to serve again. So I would move that we reappoint Mike Kelso to serve another term.
Happy to second that. And thank you, Commissioner Rowley, for making space for that conversation.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any other appointments?
Not at the moment.
Okay, we'll move on to miscellaneous. We typically start with Sarah's memo.
Thanks, commissioners. My memo is in the packet. Added some additional dates to it just to make sure, including Dan Partridge, our longtime director of Douglas County Public Health. His retirement celebration has been planned, so I added that to your packet. I know we're gonna have, I know I'm gonna have possibly more than one commissioner at the Farm Bureau dinner, so we're already gonna notice that. I wanted to talk to commissioners a little bit about June 7th. So we had originally agreed, we are taking off May 31st. That's the date we had said we were not meeting. I now have two commissioners that have problems with June 7th. Right now, there's really not much on the agenda. I had planned to have a work session, but it could be either moved or it was going to be on open space, and Logan Simpson will be here for a number of events that week. So we could just simply not have that work session at that time, and commissioners could attend public events if they need to or want to at that point in time. It was just really an update. So I guess I want to talk to commissioners about, or we could possibly just have a work session and not a business meeting, but that's a little, we've just never done that, but we certainly could. So thoughts on June 7th?
I'm all for canceling June 7th. That's a tough day for me.
Same. I would be either skipping a conference session to attend the work session or watching it later. And then for a regular business meeting, I would be in travel mode on my way to an airport. So it is, I would like to cancel it if there's nothing pressing.
So are we still not having a meeting on the 31st of May? We'd be missing 2 weeks in a row. Is that what's being suggested?
Yep. Yep, if that's what the commission wants.
Does that crowd the rest of your agendas?
No more than, not necessarily. I mean,
Just it's a little bit of reprieve right before a busy budget
Right.
season.
not necessarily, you know. Obviously, you know, in the past, commissioners, if there's something that that needs to be done urgently, I've done that and put it on the next week's agenda for authorization. I don't have any reason to indicate that, or I'd talk to you about why we would need meet. But at this point in time, I don't envision anything in that time.
Okay.
So, all right, so I'll
Sounds like
plan on canceling
canceling
June
it.
7th.
And then if something comes up and you need to bring us together, we've got two who could make it. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Commissioners,
Commissioner Willie.
that's all I have for the memo.
Anything else, commissioners? Any other miscellaneous items?
Nope.
All right. Seeing none, we're adjourned.